Hello and welcome to another video lecture from MrWatkins.com. This particular video is going to be on functional groups focused towards pre-AP biology students. So functional groups are parts of a molecule that give that molecule its function, give what it does. The first one that you're going to need to do is, or be able to recognize, is called a hydroxyl. Now a hydroxyl is basically an OH group, so an oxygen and a hydrogen that have been added to a molecule. And when we name a molecule that's got a hydroxyl on it, typically that molecule will have an OL ending on that molecule. So let me kind of show you what I'm talking about here. If I had this molecule, it has two carbons, meaning it's going to be an eth as far as its root is concerned. Each carbon has to have 4 bonds, so this carbon here will have 3 hydrogens. This one's going to have a hydrogen, but we're going to put our functional group, our OH, here. And so we have this functional group. We got a single bond between these carbons, so there's an ane. And then the OH here gives it this OL ending, so that's the ending that tells me that this is an alcohol. Hydroxyls are form high alcohols. And so this would be ethanol, the same molecule that's found in alcoholic beverages as well as also found in what they put in gasoline now. The second functional group you need to know is an aldehyde. Now aldehydes are part of the carbonyl group. You don't need to know that, but you'll learn more about that when you take IB or AP biology. And an aldehyde still has the OH atoms, but these OH atoms are put on this ending carbon, and the oxygen is double bonded here to the carbon, and the hydrogen is single bonded. Again, let's look at this 2-carbon molecule. We're going to have our hydrogen added to it, and we've got to have 4 hydrogens added, and our carbon needs, or excuse me, 3 hydrogens. Our carbon needs 4 bonds. This terminal carbon here, we're going to put our oxygen, and then we're going to add our hydrogen to it. So this piece right here is the aldehyde. Now with aldehydes, the ending is going to be Al. So this is ethanal. And again, there's a different function here because we've got this oxygen here that's very negative out here on this end. Another carbonyl, another one you need to know, is called a ketone. Now a ketone has a double bonded oxygen in it, but that double bonded oxygen cannot be on the end. It can be on any of the carbons between, but it can't be on the end. So you would never have something with 2 carbons in it being a ketone. You'd have to at least have a minimum of 3. And so typically we draw the structure like this. Okay, and here's that ketone piece. There's 4 bonds around this carbon. Now there's 4 bonds around this carbon, and there's 4 bonds around this carbon. Now because it has 3 carbons, we use prop or prop for our root, single bond between the carbons, AN, and then a ketone has an ON on. So this is propanone. Now if I had moved this double bonded oxygen here out to the end, then that would not be the ketone. The big key thing here to see is that this carbon that has the double bonded oxygen has at least 1 carbon on each side of it, and that's what makes this a ketone. There are some sugars that are ketose sugars, carbohydrates, and it's depending upon where this double bond is in that particular chain. The next one is a carboxylic acid. Now carboxylic acid, very, very similar to the aldehyde. It's terminal, in other words, being on the end of the chain, and it has this double bonded oxygen, but instead of having just the hydrogen here, it's got what looks like a hydroxide, and it is a hydroxide. But because there's this double bonded oxygen, and because we have this hydroxide, we look at this whole thing as being a functional group. This isn't an alcohol, this is an acid. So we can use this ethanol here and just replace these things out so that you can get an idea of what this molecule looks like. So there's our 4 bonds for that carbon, Here's our 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds for this carbon. And this particular molecule would be ethanoic acid. And we put oic acid on the end of that molecule. The next one that we have is an amine group. So we'll switch papers here real quick. And the amine group has a nitrogen in it. So we're still on functional groups here. And our amine has a nitrogen on it. And the nitrogen wants to make these 3 bonds. So again, if we go back to our ethane here that we had, so we've got our 2 carbons. Each carbon is going to have 4 bonds. And so we look at this particular carbon, it's got its 4. This carbon is going to be bonded to a nitrogen. Now an amine has to be a terminal nitrogen. We're going to have to add in a couple of hydrogen bonds here. So this is our functional group, and this would be aminoethane. Single bond here, 2 carbons gives it the eth. So this would be an aminoethane. Okay. Now the last one is a phosphate group. And a phosphate group has a phosphorus molecule that is surrounded by oxygen molecules. Now notice here that in all the cases we've kind of been showing oxygen having at least 2 bonds, and oxygen does have an oxidation number of -2. These oxygens are actually very negative, and we're going to see this phosphate in 2 types of molecules that we have. One molecule is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The other one is the nucleic acids, one of the 4 macromolecules. So if we were to add this phosphate here to this to this particular molecule, this ethane, get rid of the amine group, we could still have this molecule added. I doubt this molecule would be very stable because it's very small here, and we've got these negative charges here. It probably would pick up some hydrogen or even a whole complete another polyatomic ion or polyatomic molecule, huge molecule. But we still have our 4 bonds here around the carbon, and then this could bond to a phosphate group. And of course this end would be very negative. Get our 4 bonds around our carbon here. And so here's my phosphate group. So this would be phosphoethane, or ethane phosphate would be another name for it. Now let's look at something rather interesting now that we've gone through all of these. Remember I had the 2 carbons. Now there's a molecule, one of the 4 major molecules that you need to be aware of, that is an acid. So it's going to have its carboxylic acid group on one side here. We've got our 4 bonds around this carbon. And then this particular carbon is going to be bonded to an amine group. So we've got our amine group here. And of course we need 4 carbons, so let's just go ahead and put in a hydrogen here. And I think you should recognize this particular molecule. Now here's the thing, it has a name, but the one that you would most recognize, because of this functional group being an amino, and this functional group being a carboxylic acid, this is how we get our amino acids. And remember that in our 4 major macromolecules, our amino acids makes up the proteins. The name for this would probably end up being, outside of this shorthand amino acid, would be an amino. We've got our ethane, but we have an acid on the end, aminoethanoic acid. So quite frankly, all we've done is just gotten rid of that middle piece, and we call it an amino acid. Now, these are the functional groups. You must be able to pick out these functional groups on any given molecule and be able to tell me what the name of that functional group is. That's it. There are some notes that are available for you on MrWatkins.com. Good night.